Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean.
MD, and this is the Fourth Branch Project, the first and only program which is dedicated exclusively to those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Welcome to the Fourth Branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening.
Hello everyone, my name is Mike Duchan and you are on the 4th branch program. Welcome. Any man can make mistakes, but only an idiot persists in his error. If you were to talk to anyone about being an idiot, it is very certain that you're going to get pushback, or if not, being punched for calling the individual an idiot. In 2016 presidential election, Donald Trump won the presidency of the United States by 40% of the population. 40% approve of Donald Trump as the 45th president of the United States. 2 years into his presidency, despite having proven to be the least competent, the most outrageous individual who has occupied the Oval Office, and someone who doesn't know what he's doing, and yet, as of late, the percentage of individuals who still approve of Donald Trump, the job he's doing obviously, is, you guess it, 40%. Any man can make mistakes, say Marcus Cicero, a Roman philosopher in 63 BC. But only an idiot persists in his error. How in the world, if you were to be talking to any Republican and label the individual as idiot, that person would have a fit. But 2 years into the Trump administration, it has become very clear. It is unequivocal that Republicans, especially those who voted and supported for Donald Trump, are anything but idiots. There is no way in the world one can explain that the type of action that the President of the United States, whose primary job is to advance the affair of the country, has been doing just the opposite. In fact, Donald Trump has been a concern for the country. He is a national security risk for the country. And yet, we still have thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people still cheering this very idiot sitting in the Oval Office. America is indeed in a crisis.
I am MD, host of the 4th Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The 4th Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the 4th Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then.
On the menu today, we have the continuation of the topic of race relation in America. More specifically, we have been debating slave trades, the rebellion. Today, it's part 4 of the rebellion, and it is bloody. You want to stick around to hear about that. And of course, in the second part of this program, we will continue the conversation about the fact that indeed, democracy in America is in serious jeopardy. And we will prove and show that Donald Trump may be the face of the problem, but the problem of our democracy, of the situation that's plaguing the country for the past 2 years, does not lie exclusively on the shoulders of Donald Trump. It's just the face of the problem, but the Republican Party as a whole is behind this very big issue the country has been confronting. First, war on blacks.
Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you.
On blacks. If you join us for the first time, let me set the stage for you. War on Blacks is, of course, a program with the ultimate goal of providing information, relevant information that helps to get rid of racism, discrimination in America. There are 3 major factors which need to be present in order to solve any problem, whatever that problem is, including race relation in America. The first one is to acknowledge the problem, identify the problem, so to speak. The second is, of course, to understand the problem. And the third is for the concerned parties to communicate. So far, as we pointed out before, we have a problem with the first factor, the acknowledging of the problem, because various groups have various level of understanding and acknowledgement of the problem. So that makes the solution to the second aspect even a lot harder. That is where the fourth branch comes in. We have been discussing slave trades and the rebellion. Now, if you have not watched this program, you have not seen any of the previous episodes of this program, I strongly encourage you to head to the People Branch YouTube channel, where we have all the previous episodes, the introduction archive, and it will give really plenty of detail to bring you up to date as to what we are talking about. Slavery. Yes, I'm sure that you know that at some point in the history of the United States there was slavery, but the word itself doesn't convey much. In order to solve the problem of racism and discrimination in America, the problem of slavery needs to be understood. Not just that it was here in it's part of our history, but how the whole process of slavery was practiced, implemented, carried out, and why the interaction between whites and blacks, why it is at the point it is today. So it is extremely important that you take a look at those videos, and there are plenty of them, but they very easily identified. They under the banner of war on blacks and race relations, and there are quite a few of them. Now, we left yesterday talking about the fact that the rebellion took a different turn from slave trying to escape slavery, just escape slavery, and move to the north part of the country, which was more or less welcoming to blacks, to now use a different approach, make the escaping of slavery a very bloody affair. Now, we have to set two very important facts on the table, especially if you join for the first time. One, we've already acknowledged and repeated, and will continue to repeat every opportunity that we have, that we know in the country we have two very large groups of whites. Millions of whites are racist and discriminate, and millions of whites are not racist, and the other group, millions of whites, are not racist and do not discriminate. So the group is divided starkly into those two groups, making solving race relation in America a very difficult matter. Not impossible, but difficult. It makes it even more difficult today because everybody mingles in. We don't know who is who. In the past, it used to be, especially shortly after beyond slavery, it used to be very easy to identify whites who are racist or discriminate. They were mostly in the south side of the country. Today, however, it's impossible to know. You meet with an individual on the street, a white individual, the person may be from the south and not necessarily a racist, and someone from the north a racist. So that makes solving racism in America all the more difficult. But the underlying problem actually rests on millions of individuals who are actually racist, whites, and who continue to practice racism in a very subtle way. Ways that it is not easy to say so and so is a racist, but all the while continue to practice it. Now, when it comes to the conversation between blacks and whites, both blacks and whites use a scapegoat. the white nationalists, the white supremacists, because it's a common denominator that they can use, and they feel comfortable talking about the extreme aspect of racism in America. Whites take comfort, even those who are racist, they take comfort on the fact that, hey, those are the guys you're looking at, not me. And blacks feel more comfortable talking about the extreme aspect of racism, so they do not touch even the individual who may be next to them who is racist. And the purpose of this program is to actually eliminate this problem. Well, actually, I should say one of the aspects of this program is to eliminate this problem of scapegoating and identify the problem where it is, so that we can provide or at least suggest a solution. Even during slavery, there were always two very distinct groups of whites. There were those who enjoyed making slavery, who enjoyed punishing blacks, who enjoy what blacks were bringing them, which is wealth. And they would do everything humanly possible to make certain that blacks stay slaves. Oh, don't take my word for it. We'll get there in a moment. They fought with their own lives to make certain that blacks stay slaves. And of course, there were whites who fought with their lives to end slavery. You see the dilemma? Now, the white nationalists and the white supremacists, they're a very small group of people. They're not the problem in the country. They are certainly part of the problem, but the major aspect of racism, discrimination in the country cannot be put on the white nationalists or the white supremacists. They're very small, very, very, very small group. So when we are talking about racism and discrimination in this program, we're not referring to the white nationalists. We are not referring to the white supremacists. We're referring in general to racism as a whole, the widespread racism in the country. First aspect of solving a problem is to acknowledge the problem. There is a problem of racism in the country, and it's millions and millions and millions of whites who are racist and who discriminate. There is no if, there is no but about it. This is just the way it is. How can I possibly know that? First, as a black individual, I encounter predicament all the time. You cannot move about in society and not find that if you're a black individual and not have to fight or to cope with aspect of racism and discrimination. It's near impossible. Now, if you look at, for instance, a job application, whether it's a physical job application or online, you would always notice at the bottom of the application there is this clause that all employers put: we are an EEOO company, which stands for Equal Employment Opportunity Organization. Now, if it indeed true that all the companies in America are Equal Employment Opportunity Organization, then why do we have racism in America? That should not be an issue at all, should it? Of course not. Now, here's what we know. If you are watching and you are a white individual, we already acknowledge that there are two groups of whites, those who are racist and those who are not. But we also acknowledge the fact that you were not here during slavery. You could not possibly have been here during slavery. It happened a long time ago. And that's the reason today you find most whites, especially those who are racist, are very inclined to wash their hands, have nothing to do with slavery. So they're not responsible for the predicament for what currently is going on in the country. Now, in order to understand what happened during bloody rebellion, uprising of slaves, you have to go back and understand what those slaves were going through, the kind of punishment that were inflicted on them for no reason other than trying to escape slavery. Imagine that. Imagine that for a moment. You have a group of individuals who took you hostage, forced you to slave for them so that they can become richer, make more wealth, send their kids to school, to college, to get an education, have businesses. They force you to do that, and they beat you until you bled, and still force you to go in the field to work. But when you try to escape, they caught you and they execute you. Now, this is the period of slavery. You have to put it in perspective, put it in context in order for you to understand black slave reaction before the label that white so fittingly place on blacks. They call blacks criminals, they call blacks lazy, they call blacks thieves, and this is passed from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next, until it gets to you, and you grow up in an environment where your parents, your grandparents pass those type of information to you without any context, and you grow up hating blacks and continuing the use of those labels without ever caring a second that all those information that were passed to you by your ancestors, they forgot the very important part of the problem. Now you will begin to understand why that is, and at least start getting a context to see that you too, as a white individual, if you are a descendant of slave owners, you become indirectly responsible for the predicament that the country has when it comes to race relation in America. You're not concerned. You cannot wash your hand and say, I have nothing to do with that. In fact, you have a lot to do with the predicament the country is in, because you carried with you the baggage that was passed to you, both the baggage and all the wealth that was passed to you by your ancestors, all of that done on the back of black slaves, the same individual or descendant of individual you see either across the street or a few blocks down from where you live, that you look at as, oh, this guy is living in poverty. He doesn't have an education. But you have, as far as you're concerned, you have absolutely nothing to do with that. As we continue that conversation, we'll show you that if you are a descendant of slave ownership, you are indirectly responsible not only for the plight of blacks when it comes to everything from education to financial circumstances, and to, of course, interaction between blacks and whites. You cannot just get out of it as if it doesn't concern you. Now, we talked yesterday about a very bloody aspect of the rebellion. And just to recap, we're going to talk about an individual, a white individual, who also will join the slaves. We're not talking about during the the Civil War here. We're talking about during slavery, where a white individual would join the slave fighting the slave owners and will also suffer the same fate as blacks. I brought that because as I mentioned over and over and over, during slavery there were many whites who did not approve of slavery. There were many whites who did not have slaves because they believed it was unacceptable, it was inhuman for individuals to enslave others for their enrichment. And the irony of the period is the fact that the white slave owners, they went to church, pretended to be Christian, because every Sunday or whatever their religion was, they went to church claiming that they love God, claiming to be doing the right thing, and at the same time at home, and if they have businesses, they have slaves, they were inflicting inhuman treatment on. And they still continue to do that up to today. So we have a certain way of identifying, at least through actions, some of those individuals who are either descendants of slave ownership or who have simply joined a group of those who practice discrimination in the country. Because me personally, I do not take the words of someone who just say, I'm not racist. Because anyone can say that. And you will be hard-pressed to find that you talk to any white individual and for that individual to say, yes, I'm racist and I discriminate. Nobody's going to say that. But watch what they do, watch how they act towards blacks, and you have a pretty good understanding where they're at. I'll take, for example, Fox. Fox, we know most of the individuals who work at Fox, they are blatantly racist and they discriminate. Anytime that something happens to a black individual, the individual that they usually go and bash is the victim. That's a mentality of whites who are racist, who discriminate. That's the exact same approach that whites in the South had towards black slaves. They enslaved them, they mistreated them, they tortured them, they killed them, but the minute that they decided to react, to strike back, the problem becomes them. Oh, they are the problem. That's a typical behavior of individuals who are racist, individuals who discriminate. It's always to blame the victim. Now, we already discussed at length that Gabriel Prosser was one of the slaves who tried to escape slavery along with other slaves, get caught, get executed. Next, 1820, that was 1800. 1822, then McVezy came and tried to do the same thing, get caught, get executed. And in 1831, Nat Turner used a different approach. Instead of just escaping slavery, decided to do something in between, kill slave owners in the process. And of course, he too got caught and got executed. Now, before we move to the gentleman, and you're going to use that gentleman in particular for a reason, but it wasn't just an individual. It wasn't just a white individual who was siding with the slave to fight against slavery. There were plenty of that happening. Some of their words pushing back community organizers and so on and so forth. There are plenty of that going in different parts of the country, especially the north side of the country, where slavery was not really the main source of income or revenue for whites. And that's another story. We'll try to address that a little bit too, because what I just said is not 100% true. Now, there are two rebellions that happened between those I just mentioned. Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner. I mentioned all those, but there were two very specific rebellions that happened. One also happened in South Carolina in 1739. That was called the Stono Rebellion. Now, that too was a bloody rebellion. Now, Gabriel Prosser, if you recall, during the time we were discussing it, he was one of the slaves who organized in order to escape slavery. Now, most of the uprising and rebellion that happened prior to that, they were mostly disorganized. Now, it was just human nature. You don't want to stay slave, to continue to be treated the way that slave owners were treating blacks. So obviously, from time to time, you had uprising. Now, the Stono Rebellion is important to mention because of the fact that there were a group of slaves. According to historical record, there were 20 slaves who decided in 1739, and the reason that they call it the Stono Rebellion is because presumably they were going to cross a bridge called the Stono River Bridge. It is in Charleston, South Carolina. So those 20 slaves, what they did is they broke into store and they stole weapons, they stole supplies, and they were making their way toward Florida. They didn't really want to stay necessarily in South Carolina, because the idea for them was to escape anywhere but where they were being treated the way that they were being treated. Of course, Florida had plenty of slaves too. So as far as what the plan was, I have to tell you there was no plan, because as I mentioned several times here, most of the uprising, most of the escape were done on a whim. Slave who decided, well, let's just get the hell out of that hellhole. And they would just, however many, would gather, and then they would try. And their whole strategy, if you want to call that, was just to break into store, to burn the plantation, to pretty much do what you would call today terrorist act, in order to warn the white slave owners that, well, they are not sticking around. So in their path, of course, you can imagine, in their path, they were literally escaping Charleston. They were leaving the place, getting the hell out of the place. But of course, in the process of doing that, they encounter whites, of course, white slave owners or other whites who try to stop them. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine that. You were slave, you were being mistreated, you were being punished, killed, you seen your women being raped, you were being you were being beat until you bled, and now you have a way to escape, and you imagine someone is going to try to stop you. Imagine that for a moment. So it is pointless to say that those slaves did not have any patience to try to just get those whites out of their way. They killed them in their way. So by the time that they reached Florida, according to historical record, they grew to 100. So they started in Charleston, South Carolina, as 20 slaves, and on their way to Florida, they grew to 100. But that didn't really help them much, because as they were heading there, of course, they were leaving tragedies behind. They were killing whites in the process, especially whites who tried to get on in the way. They were killing them, and they were making their way there. But to show you how disorganized they were, so they got to Florida, and when they got there, they were trying to get some slaves who were working on plantation to join the group. So there was no leader, there was no strategy whatsoever. So the idea was just, let's just get the hell out of there. So what was the plan? There was no plan, except that we got a few weapons, we don't want to be slave anymore, and that's it. There was no leader, there was nobody to say, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to do it. There was nothing at all. All they were doing in the process of going through that is setting fire on plantation and killing whites in the process, and that was the whole plan. I don't have to tell you that, yes, they got caught and they got executed. So the bloody uprising happened on both sides now. Both black and white were being slaughtered. Now let's pause for just one instant and ask the very question. If you were to be, I know it's a hypothetical example, a question that I'm about to ask, and it may not be as easy to answer that question if you transport yourself back in time, because you would have to put yourself in the same context as the slave owners in order to really grasp, even come to understand why they were so gung-ho about keeping black slaves. Now, from all aspects of a human being, if you were to have someone you doing something to, that you know, it's not that you don't know, you know what you were doing to that individual is bad. And the reason that we know that you know is because you had to make, you had to take so many precautions, because you expect that individual, if he gets a way to get at you, he will. Nobody try to harm someone who is doing good to them. That doesn't happen. Well, exceptional cases, but in general, that doesn't happen. So the white slave owners knew what they were doing to blacks was wrong. They knew that. One, they had a lot of whites on different other parts of the country that says, hey, this is not acceptable, this is inhuman, we cannot do that. That's number one. And number two, the white slave owners took so many precautions, not only to chain the slave, but to have armed guards, their own private armed guard, to watch over the slave. In other words, logic would tell you that they know what they were doing to blacks was wrong. And white slave owners, because of all those little uprisings here and there, and because they don't know at which point that all those uprisings will get to them, and on top of that, especially those who had slaves inside their house, women, kids, they could not sleep properly, because the slave that they had at home may not necessarily be the individual that's going to kill them or that's going to harm them and their families, but that person could leave the door open, unlocked, for slaves to come in at night. So slave owners had to sleep with one eye open. Because why? You ask yourself, if what you were doing to slaves was not bad, you wouldn't have any reason for you to be fearful of slave, would you? Of course not. But that's the predicament that white slave owners were finding themselves in, and yet they did not change. They continued to go to church, to talk, send their kids to school, get a good education, become richer, buy houses, land, and so on, all on the back of the slaves, punishing them, killing them, torturing them, starving them to death. So they knew what they were doing was wrong. At the first sign of a slave who decided that enough was enough, what did the white slave owner say? Oh my God, the slaves, they're violent, they're criminals. All this time, they were doing all those things to the slaves. They brained them like animals. They beat them until they bled and forced them to go in the field to work. They could not show any sign of fatigue. They worked them 18 hours a day. And white, especially the racists, have the nerve to continue to call blacks lazy. Figure that out. Blaming the victim. It's almost like it's a setup that whites want blacks to always have to struggle, despite the fact they're the one putting blacks in those predicaments. It's mind-boggling, but this is a history of America. Now, and that's the irony of the whole thing. The white slave owners, those who actually were doing the wrong thing, those were the ones who always ready to blame the slaves. They killed the slaves, no problem. They tortured them, no problem. They starved them to death, no problem. They worked them 18 hours a day, no problem. They brained them, no problem. Whatever they did to them, it was okay. It seems to be they justify doing those things. But when slaves decided enough is enough and decided to give them a taste of their own medicine, all hell broke loose. The slaves blacks are criminal. They violent. Denmark Vesey and 25 other slaves who tried to escape. Just that, escape slavery. Get caught, get executed. For no reason but to try to escape slavery. Denmark Vesey and 35 of other individuals get caught, get executed. Just for trying to escape slavery. Nat Turner and 75 other individuals with him get caught, get executed. But if slaves try to reach freedom, of course on your path you kill whoever is trying to stop you. Suddenly, blacks are criminal. That's where this started in the South. Blacks are criminal because they killed their way to freedom. They shouldn't have. They should have just accepted being slaves. What was wrong with those people? So the Stonewall Rebellion, as the previous, well, actually I shouldn't say previous, because the Stonewall Rebellion happened before Gabriel Prosser. So I wanted to bring this example, and there is another one that we will talk about next time. That's something that happened in New York. And those actually happened before blacks start to do some sort of organizing in order to end slavery. But before, there were plenty of those. So those are not exceptional example by any means. They just happen to also have been bloody uprising without any organization whatsoever of individuals who were enslaved who just wanted to escape slavery. So in other words, when we talk about Gabriel Prosser, there were precedent for those leaders, those slave leaders, there were precedent for them to start doing organizing, to start organizing the slave, because they realized that all those uprisings that happened didn't get the slave anywhere. In fact, if anything, they were just getting killed. So the Stonewall Rebellion, by any analysis, if you were looking at it from if you were to take a step back from in history, you would have thought that they would have succeeded, because they started in Charleston, South Carolina, making their way towards Florida, and in the process they managed to get all the way to Florida. So from a historical perspective, they were making progress. They were killing in their way, killing anyone that stood in their way, and also because they weren't organized, so killing and just leaving the bodies all over the place makes certain that they could easily, the white authorities could easily follow them to wherever they were heading. So complete disorganization. So those individuals, the 20 black, which increased to 100, and later on they were all captured, killed. Even those who tried to flee, who tried to hide, they did for a little while, but they were eventually captured and they were tried and executed. Bloody rebellion, bloody uprising. The question is, why didn't the white or someone get this light bulb that says, what are we doing? We're doing harm to those people and they want to get out of it. Why don't we let them? Of course not. Why should they?
Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you.
F. Kennedy said the ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all. New York Times reported the past couple of days that there were at least 5 meetings that Donald Trump, the current president of the United States, had with Vladimir Putin, and those meetings were never reported, where even notes taken by translators were confiscated by Donald Trump. Now, I want you to find, if you're able to see how easy it is, if you have a shred of common sense, to understand that the current president of the United States did not, has not, and still not working for the well-being of our nation. Now, everything is translated in the United States as if it's politics. And that's the reason most of the time nothing can get resolved. But what should jump immediately to at anyone who is a patriot is the following. Even if we assume for a second, we're going to make a very interesting assumption, which is weird because the state of affairs tells us that that assumption is in the realm of impossibility. But let's assume for just 1 second that Russia is one of the most important allies of the United States. And let's try to imagine that you have a president, not necessarily Donald Trump, but a president who, meeting after meeting, sit with that individual, that head of state, Russia. Let's assume Russia doesn't have any ill-conceived idea or behavior towards the United States. Even if that were to be the case, it still would be extraordinary for the President of the United States to sit down with that head of state without anybody present. But much, much, much worse, would take the note that the translator had and specifically instruct the translator not to pass that information to anyone. Imagine that for 1 second. We're not talking about enemy, we're talking about friend, ally. Personally, I do not, the constituent, as I mentioned 1,000 times, a lot of people try to go around the plate instead of saying the obvious. The individuals who supported, who voted for, and who continue to support Donald Trump are ignorant. They are naturally ignorant people. They're gullible, they're ignorant. There is no other way to explain it, because anyone with a brain, you don't have to be a genius, but anyone with an average level of intelligence should be able to see, because that's what makes, At least that's what's supposed to differentiate a human being from all other animal species. That we have a brain, we're able to deduct things, we're able to look at things and be able to come up to a conclusion, no matter what your political affiliation is. Now, if you cannot do that, you're not any different than any other animal. You just as there is no other way to explain it. Donald Trump became president with 40%. And as of date, there are still those same 40% that still continue to support him. And Donald Trump has gotten worse from the time he was campaigning for the presidency of the United States to today, because now we know that Donald Trump is not just a crooked businessman. We now know Donald Trump is not just really an idiot, incompetent, and cannot even do anything right. But now we know that Donald Trump had collaborated with another head of state. Now, as much as those who support Donald Trump try to come up with, oh, we don't know that just yet, there is nothing that, I mean, what exactly do you want? Do you want Donald Trump himself to hand you what has happened? And I guarantee you, for those 40%, even when they see that, they will continue to say, oh no, that's not the case. And that's where I say that I do not personally fault those individuals, because it is pretty obvious those are ignorant individuals. They do not have the ability to reason. They do not have the ability to comprehend. They simply do not have any logical, rational ability. The people who are responsible for the problem are the legislators. Yes, those individuals that were elected to represent those people, we can say with a fair degree of knowledge that they have a brain. Or do they? Because they can see what most logical people can see. A president that's working to the detriment of the country. Everything that Donald Trump has done, anyone that's watching, anyone that's following, has been not for the purpose of elevating the United States. Despite what the words that being used, make America great again, that's just words. But his action has been mostly for the destruction of our institution. Donald Trump has trampled the rule of law. This is not a statement. This is a fact. Ignore the Constitution. This is not a statement. This is a fact. And yet, we have 40% of those same individuals continuously cheering. Now, how do you explain that? How do you explain giving a knife, a sharper knife, to someone who is stabbing you? How do you explain that? You cannot explain, as I mentioned 1,000 times. You cannot explain being smart by speaking like that, by speaking like a fool and acting like an idiot. You cannot explain that. There is no logic behind explaining that, oh gee, I'm a smart individual. I went to school, I went to college, I got my degree. Maybe you did. You shouldn't have. That's a waste of money. Which smart individual would hand a sharper knife to someone that's stabbing you? Donald Trump has not been in hiding doing what he's doing. In plain sight, he's been destroying the very institution which have protected our country. ignoring the rule of law, the same thing that we require of anyone in the country. We say no one is above the law. And yet, those same individuals, we're talking about Republican legislators. We're not talking about constituent anymore, because we already determined that the constituent, they do not have the ability to think straight, to think clearly, and to repudiate Donald Trump, because they still cheering the individual that destroying their way of life. This is no smart people. But what is troubling is the fact that the legislators, the Republican legislators, congressmen and senators, have worked hand in hand with Donald Trump to destroy the very institution which protect our country. Of course, they spin it 1,000 ways and tell you this and tell you that. But anyone looking at what's going on in the country through a historian prism would have chilled. Because this is not anything that anyone looking at and say, that was just a dark period in our history. We had that period in our history, slavery, which we just talked about. But the framers of the Constitution thought things really went really as far as really thinking deep as to how to protect the Republic. But I realized that we have flaws in our Constitution, and those flaws cannot be ignored. We cannot just shrug it off, because Donald Trump, if anything good happened, as far as the presidency of Donald Trump, is at least to pinpoint the very serious flaws we have in our Constitution. A political party controls both Congress and the Senate, also the presidency of the country, should not be a problem if the legislative branch was acting the way that legislative branch, the way that that particular body of the government was created for. But unfortunately, we found out the hard way that the framers of the Constitution never imagined that there would be all those individuals, members of a political party, who would relinquish their constitutional duty and support the executive branch and helping that branch to destroy the very institution of our country. The framers of the Constitution didn't see that coming. We like to call it politics because it makes it easy for you to say, hey, we don't like what Democrats do. We don't like what Republicans do. It makes it easy to explain it that way. But this is not politics. When it comes to the security of the country, when it comes to matters of the constitution of the country, we're not talking about politics anymore. We're talking about individuals who do not care about the country and who decide it's better for them to keep their job, to lie to their constituent. They're not going to be here. Like Donald Trump said when he added a $1.5 trillion to the national debt. His answer, I'm not going to be around to pay for it. Yes, that's the kind of people we have today in the Republican Party. People who do not care about what they do as long as it helps them to keep their position in Washington. Now, if the constituent were smart, we could have said, or at least we have a stopgap. Unfortunately, they are not. So we do have a problem. Our democracy is in jeopardy. Republican legislators, elected officials have made it their business to lie to their constituent. They have been masters of deception. They do not do anything by arguing their position, but they have to lie to the constituent. Ask yourself the question, why? If I have something to offer you and it's good, it's better than what the other guy is offering you, do I need to lie to you about that? That's common sense. Oh, that, by the way, that's really what we are about at the fourth branch. It's just pure common sense. Why do Republican legislators and elected officials have to lie? Why do they have to lie? Because they know what they're offering is not better. So they have to lie to you and make you believe it's better. We have plenty of examples, and we've been giving those examples to you. That your Republican congressmen, your Republican senators, they've been lying to you about pretty much everything that they come and talk to you about. We went down the line talking about that. The question is, why? Now, I'm not making a case for Democrats here. In case I already start hearing the machine of your brain, because usually that's the only part of the brain that seems to work in the Republican circle. That anything that says that they do not like, they do not agree with, they just, oh, those damn liberals. This is not to make a case saying that Democrats are great. There are plenty of things you may not agree with. There are plenty of things that you may not like. And that's the point. If I present to you this pen, and I say it's a beautiful black pen, I lie to you because the pen is not black, it's black and gray. But because if I know you like black, then I lie to you by saying it's a beautiful black pen. Now, you're not gonna like the idea that if a Democrat come and say, well, this is a beautiful gray pen that has some part of blacks in it. So you automatically reject it because you don't like it. But you at least get the facts from the Democrats. What I'm trying to say is, you may not like what you hear because you just don't like it, but at least you get the actual facts, versus someone who just told you that this is a black pen because they want you to like it. And that's what Republican legislators, elected officials do. They tell you what they believe you want to hear. They lie to you. And that's the irony of things, because you seem to like being lied to. And that's what makes Republican legislators masters of deception.
Join me here on the fourth branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday.
And every weekday at 2 p.m. This is the fourth branch.
Common sense in a world of chaos.
This program will resume in just a moment.
I do thank you for spending the time with me, and I hope that you did get something out of this conversation, out of the discussion of those topics. We hope you can join us again tomorrow at 2 p.m. In the meantime, if you have a question, comment, criticism, suggestion, do not hesitate to contact us. We'd like to hear from you. If you have a topic you would like us to research and talk about, shoot us a line. We will research it, we will address it. In the meantime, we hope you have a wonderful evening.
I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then.
The Fourth Branch podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.